The year was 1847. As death stalked the wagon train across the bitter Wyoming wilderness, two sisters found salvation in the most unlikely of places, the hollowed-out carcass of a freshly killed buffalo, hunted by those who had massacred their companions. Rebecca and Sarah Thompson would soon discover that their greatest challenge wasn't surviving the attack, but enduring the harsh winter that followed. This is the remarkable true story of how two educated women from Boston forged an unlikely alliance with a Crow medicine woman, changing 3 lives forever in a tale of survival, courage, and understanding that transcended the violent divisions of America's western frontier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late autumn wind cut across the open plains like a knife, carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of a brutal winter. Rebecca Thompson pulled her woolen shawl tighter as she gazed across the vast Wyoming Territory landscape from her perch on the wagon seat. At 24, she had never imagined herself so far from the cobblestone streets and brick buildings of Boston, where she had spent her entire life until 3 months ago. "Do you think Father was right about the opportunities out west?" asked Sarah, Rebecca's younger sister by 3 years, who sat beside her with a leather-bound journal open on her lap. Even after weeks of travel, Sarah maintained her habit of documenting their journey with both words and sketches, a practice their father, Professor William Thompson, had encouraged in both his daughters. "I believe he was," Rebecca replied, though the confidence in her voice didn't quite reach her eyes. Their father's sudden passing the previous spring had left them with little choice but to accept their uncle's invitation to join him in Oregon Territory. As unmarried women with education but limited means, their prospects in Boston had narrowed considerably with their father's death. At the front of the caravan, wagon master Jeremiah Blackwood raised his hand, signaling a stop. The 15 wagons of the Blackwood Company came to a halt in a sheltered valley beside a narrow stream, one of the last reliable water sources before the difficult mountain crossing that lay ahead. "We'll make camp here for 2 days," Blackwood announced as he rode past the Thompsons' wagon. "Need to rest the oxen and repair some wheels before tackling the high country. Winter's coming early this year." Rebecca noted the concern etched into the weathered lines of Blackwood's face. At 50, he had guided wagons west for over a decade, and his reputation for caution and good judgment had been a primary factor in their decision to join his company rather than one of the larger, faster-moving trains. As the sisters helped establish camp with practiced efficiency, Rebecca observed the subtle tension that had been building among the travelers over the past week. Provisions were running lower than expected, game had been scarce, and the early cold snap had everyone on edge. "Miss Rebecca," called Eleanor Prescott, the wife of the company's doctor, "would you please assist with the children's lessons this afternoon? Dr. Prescott needs my help inventorying our medical supplies." "Of course," Rebecca replied, grateful for the distraction. Before their father's death, she had taught at a small girls' academy in Boston, and maintaining educational routines for the company's 12 children had become her unofficial responsibility during the journey. Sarah, meanwhile, had been enlisted by Dr. Prescott to document medicinal plants they encountered along the trail. Her artistic talents and their father's extensive botanical training made her an ideal assistant for expanding the doctor's knowledge of Western flora. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the camp, Rebecca noticed 3 riders approaching from the east, not following the trail, but cutting across open country at a deliberate pace. Blackwood and several men moved to meet them, hands resting casually but meaningfully on their rifles. "Army Scouts," murmured John Willard, the blacksmith, whose wagon was positioned next to the Thompsons. "Probably out of Fort Laramie." Rebecca watched the exchange with interest. The lead scout, a tall man with a cavalry uniform and lieutenant's insignia, dismounted to speak with Blackwood. Their conversation appeared intense but not hostile. After several minutes, Blackwood nodded grimly and escorted the lieutenant toward the center of the camp. "Company meeting!" Blackwood called, his voice carrying across the circle of wagons. "Everyone gather round. Lieutenant Monroe brings important news." The travelers assembled quickly, conversations hushed, faces showing the wariness of people who had learned that unexpected news on the frontier rarely boded well. Lieutenant James Monroe removed his hat, revealing close-cropped dark hair and a face younger than Rebecca had expected for his rank. His expression, however, carried the weight of experience beyond his years. "Folks, I regret to inform you that there have been attacks on 2 separate wagon companies north of here in the past 3 weeks, Monroe announced without preamble. "Approximately 30 miles from your intended route. The attackers weren't Indians, as you might expect, but a band of deserters and outlaws who've been preying on travelers since summer." A murmur ran through the assembled company. Attacks by hostile tribes were a known risk, one they had prepared for. But renegade. White men often proved more dangerous and unpredictable. "They number about 15 men, well-armed and desperate," Monroe continued. "They've been taking supplies, horses and valuables, and they've shown no mercy to those who resist." His gaze swept the gathered faces. "I strongly advise delaying your crossing until we've had a chance to track these men down. Another cavalry detachment is already in pursuit." "Delay means facing the mountains in deeper snow," Blackwood responded, voicing the dilemma aloud. "That brings its own dangers." "There's another option," offered Monroe. "A southern route, adding perhaps 10 days to your journey, but likely safer. I can provide maps." The discussion that followed was heated. Some families advocated for waiting, others for the southern detour, while a faction led by Harold Dixon, a wealthy merchant from Philadelphia, insisted on continuing as planned, but with increased vigilance. "We're well armed," Dixon argued, gesturing to the men of the company. 15 of us capable of fighting, most with military experience. These cowards prey on the weak, not on prepared companies like ours." Rebecca exchanged a glance with Sarah, noting her sister's worried expression. Their uncle expected them by mid-December. Significant delays might mean attempting the final mountain passes in the worst of winter conditions. After an hour of debate, a compromise was reached. They would take the southern route, but push harder to make up time. Longer days on the trail, shorter stays at camp. Lieutenant Monroe promised to leave one of his men, Corporal Thomas Jenkins, with the company as both guide and additional protection. As the meeting dispersed, Rebecca found herself standing near Monroe as he spread a map on a crate for Blackwood. "To study, Lieutenant," she asked, "these outlaws. What makes them target certain wagon trains over others?" Monroe looked up, seeming to truly notice her for the first time. "Intelligence, Miss Thompson, Rebecca Thompson, and my sister, Sarah, Miss Thompson. They appear to gather information at trading posts and forts. They know which companies carry valuable cargo or significant funds." His expression darkened. Dixon's not exactly quiet about his success in business. That kind of talk travels. That night, as the sisters prepared for sleep in their wagon, Sarah's voice came softly through the darkness. "Do you think we made the right decision, Becca? Coming west?" Rebecca stared at the canvas above them, remembering their modest but comfortable home in Boston, the predictable rhythms of their former life. "We had few options, Sarah. Uncle James offered us a home and purpose. That's more than many women in our situation could hope for." "I know," Sarah sighed. "I just can't shake this feeling of unease." "Lieutenant Monroe and Corporal Jenkins seem capable," Rebecca reassured her, "and Blackwood has brought companies through safely for years." "It's not just the outlaws," Sarah whispered. "Something about Dixon troubles me. Have you noticed how he watches us, and the way he's been questioning everyone about their backgrounds and possessions?" Rebecca had indeed noticed. Dixon had joined their company in St. Louis, a late addition, with only a cursory introduction. His manner was oddly probing, his stories of business success in Philadelphia inconsistent when she compared notes with others he'd spoken to. "We'll keep our distance," Rebecca decided, "and our wits about us. Get some sleep now. Tomorrow will be a long day." As she drifted towards sleep, Rebecca couldn't have known how prophetic her sister's concerns would prove to be, nor that within 48 hours their lives would hang by the thinnest of threads. The education they had received in Boston's finest schools would soon prove far less valuable than the brutal lessons of survival the frontier was about to teach them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The company set out at first light, wagons arranged in tight formation with armed men, positioned strategically throughout the train. Corporal Jenkins rode ahead as scout, returning periodically to confer with Blackwood about the route. The promised southern detour took them through increasingly rugged country, rolling hills giving way to rocky outcroppings that forced the wagons to navigate narrow passages single file. By midday of the second day, Rebecca noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere. The usual calls between wagons had diminished. People spoke in hushed tones. Even the children seemed to sense the tension, their play subdued as they walked alongside the lumbering vehicles. "We're being watched," Sarah murmured as she handed Rebecca a piece of dried apple from their rations. "Look at Jenkins." The corporal had returned from another scouting foray, but instead of his usual methodical report to Blackwood, his movements were hurried, his expression grim. Rebecca watched as he spoke urgently to Blackwood and Dixon, gesturing toward a distant ridgeline. Within minutes, Blackwood had ordered the wagons into a defensive circle in a small clearing backed by a steep embankment. The oxen were quickly unhitched and moved to the protected inner space, along with the children and most of the women. "What's happening?" Rebecca asked Mrs. Prescott as they helped corral the younger children. Jenkins spotted riders shadowing. "Us," the doctor's wife replied, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "Too many to be army patrols." Dr. Prescott approached, medical bag in hand. "Rebecca, Sarah, both of you have medical knowledge. If things turn difficult, I'll need your assistance." Rebecca nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. Their father had insisted. His daughters understand basic medical treatment, a progressive view that had raised eyebrows in Boston society but might now prove invaluable. Dixon strode through the center of the circle, checking rifle positions and issuing orders with an authority that seemed to have materialized overnight. Rebecca noticed Blackwood's frown as the merchant countermanded one of his directions about ammunition distribution. "Something's not right," Sarah whispered, echoing Rebecca's thoughts. "Dixon seems almost prepared for this." Before Rebecca could respond, a shot cracked across the clearing. One of the company men cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell back from his position at a wagon edge. "Take cover!" Blackwood shouted as a volley of gunfire erupted from the tree line. What followed was chaos. The outlaws, at least 20 by Rebecca's count, not the 15 Lieutenant Monroe had reported, attacked from multiple positions. Their initial volley focused on the men defending the wagons. Rebecca and Sarah worked alongside Dr. Prescott, dragging wounded men to shelter, applying pressure to bleeding wounds, and preparing bandages from torn clothing. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the metallic scent of blood as the attack intensified. "We can't hold them!" someone shouted as 3 defenders fell in rapid succession. Through gaps between the wagons, Rebecca caught glimpses of the attackers advancing. They wore no uniforms, their clothing a hodgepodge of civilian and military garments. Some had beards, others were clean-shaven, but all moved with the coordinated precision of men accustomed to violence. Suddenly, Dixon appeared beside their makeshift medical station, rifle in hand. Instead of joining the defense, he knelt next to Rebecca. "Thompson," he said urgently, "when they breach the circle, and they will, head for the embankment. There's a game trail leading up. Take your sister." Rebecca stared at him in confusion. "What about the others?" Dixon's expression hardened. "Don't be a fool. Save yourselves." Before she could question him further, Dixon moved away, not toward the defense line, but toward the wagons containing the company's valuables. "He knows them," Sarah gasped, comprehension dawning. "Rebecca, he's with them." The realization struck Rebecca with sickening clarity. Dixon's late addition to their company, his detailed questioning of everyone's backgrounds and possessions, his eagerness to continue despite Monroe's warnings. He wasn't just a merchant. He was the outlaw's informant. "We need to warn Blackwood," Rebecca started, but a new barrage of gunfire pinned them down. Dr. Prescott fell next to them, a dark stain spreading across his chest. His wife screamed, lunging toward him only to be caught by another bullet. Rebecca pulled Sarah down as shots tore through the canvas behind them. The defenses were collapsing. The outlaws had breached the wagon circle at multiple points, and the sounds of close-quarter fighting mixed with screams from women and children. "The embankment," Rebecca decided, grabbing Sarah's arm. "Dixon was right about one thing. We can't stay here." They crawled through the chaos, staying low behind crates and debris. Twice they froze as attackers passed nearby, too intent on looting to notice them. They had nearly reached the base of the embankment when they heard a child's cry nearby. Emma Prescott, Sarah identified immediately, veering toward the sound. Rebecca followed, finding the 6-year-old daughter of the doctor crouched beneath a wagon, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "Come with us," Rebecca whispered, extending her hand. The thunder of hooves announced a new development, more riders approaching fast from the east. For a moment, Rebecca hoped for salvation, perhaps Lieutenant Monroe returning with reinforcements. But the outlaws showed no concern. If anything, they became more methodical in their looting. "Those aren't soldiers," Sarah realized aloud. "They're the rest of the outlaw band." With Emma between them, the sisters finally reached the embankment. The game trail Dixon had mentioned was barely visible, a narrow track winding up the steep slope. They had just started climbing when shouts indicated they'd been spotted. "Run!" Rebecca pushed Sarah and Emma ahead as bullets kicked up dirt around them. The trail switched back through scrubby brush, offering minimal cover. Rebecca heard men starting to climb after them, their curses carrying clearly in the cold air. At the top, the sisters faced a horrible choice: continue into open country where they'd be visible for miles, or try to find cover in the scattered boulders and sparse trees of the ridgeline. Emma solved their dilemma by collapsing, her small body shaking with exhaustion and terror. They couldn't outrun mounted pursuers across open ground, not with a child. "There," Sarah pointed to a jumble of massive rocks that had split to create a narrow crevice. "We might fit." They squeezed into the opening, pulling Emma with them. The space widened slightly inside, before narrowing again at the far end. Not a true cave, but a sheltered passage through the rock formation. They pressed as far back as possible, covering Emma's mouth gently when she began to whimper. Outside, they heard men reaching the top of the embankment, voices calling to each other as they searched. "Check them rocks," a gruff voice ordered. Dixon said the sisters had valuables sewn into their petticoats. Rebecca's blood ran cold. Dixon hadn't suggested the embankment escape route to save them. He'd directed them there to be caught separately, away from witnesses, by men who knew exactly who to look for. Heavy footsteps approached their hiding place. Sarah clutched Rebecca's hand so tightly it hurt, both of them straining to control their breathing. A shadow fell across the crevice entrance. "Too narrow," the man called after examining the opening. "Nobody's fitting through there." "Keep looking," came the reply. "Mason wants them found." For nearly an hour, they remained motionless as the search continued. Eventually, the voices receded, moving along the ridgeline. Only then did Rebecca dare to whisper, "We need to move. They'll return with more men, maybe torches, to see into these spaces." "Where can we go?" Sarah asked, the reality of their situation setting in. They had no supplies, no weapons, and a traumatized child to protect. The wagon train below had fallen, silent except for occasional shouts as the outlaws continued their methodical plundering. Rebecca closed her eyes, forcing herself to think clearly. "We head north," she decided, "away from their southern route and toward Fort Laramie. Lieutenant, Monroe mentioned another cavalry detachment if we can find them." Sarah nodded grimly. "How far to the fort?" "At least 60 miles, Rebecca estimated. Maybe more." They waited until dusk before emerging from their hiding place. The sight that greeted them from the ridgeline turned Rebecca's stomach. Below, the wagons still formed their defensive circle, but many were now burning. Bodies lay scattered across the clearing, men who had tried to defend their families, women who had resisted, even children caught in the crossfire. "Don't look, Emma." Sarah turned the child's face against her skirt. The outlaws had made camp nearby, apparently intending to spend the night sorting through their plunder before moving on. Their campfires provided enough light for Rebecca to see riders still patrolling the perimeter. "We can't stay on the ridgeline," she whispered. "It's too exposed once daylight comes." They began moving north, keeping low and using what cover existed. Emma, seemingly in shock, followed without protest, her small hand clasped tightly in Sarah's. The first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and with them the biting cold of a Wyoming autumn night. "We need shelter and warmth," Sarah said as Emma began to shiver violently. "She won't survive the night in the open." Rebecca had been thinking the same thing, scanning the landscape desperately for options. The plains stretched before them, broken occasionally by rock formations or shallow ravines, but offering no obvious sanctuary. As full darkness enveloped them, a new sound carried on the wind. Low, rumbling grunts, punctuated by occasional bellows. "Buffalo," Rebecca identified, hope flickering for the first time. "A small herd from the sound." "How does that help us?" Sarah asked, teeth chattering. "Warmth," Rebecca answered, "and possibly cover. Buffalo cluster together against the cold, if we can get close enough without startling them." It was a desperate plan, but they had no better options. Following the sounds, they crept forward, until they could make out dark, massive shapes huddled together in a shallow depression. At least 30 buffalo had bedded down for the night, their bodies creating a fortress against the wind. They were debating how to approach when a different sound reached them, horses moving at a walk, coming from the direction of the outlaws. "Camp, they're still hunting us," Sarah breathed. Rebecca made a swift decision. "Stay here with Emma. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, keep heading north." Before Sarah could protest, Rebecca slipped away, moving parallel to the approaching riders. In the darkness, she could make out 3 men following what appeared to be their trail with lanterns. Dixon had clearly convinced them of the value of finding the Thompson sisters. Her only advantage was knowledge of exactly where Sarah and Emma waited. The hunters were following a trail that would eventually lead them there, unless she created a diversion. Taking a deep breath, Rebecca emerged from cover nearly 100 yards to the west of her sister's position. "Help!" she shouted, waving, her arms before immediately ducking down again. The effect was instantaneous. The riders wheeled toward her voice, spurring their horses forward. Rebecca ran, no longer concerned with leaving tracks, focusing only on drawing them away from Sarah and Emma. She led them on a winding chase through the darkness, using the terrain to stay just ahead of their pursuit. When she judged she'd pulled them far enough away, she doubled back, circling wide to rejoin her sister. The ruse had worked, for now, but it had also confirmed their worst fears. The outlaws weren't simply looting, they were specifically hunting the Thompson sisters. "We need to reach that buffalo herd," Rebecca gasped as they crouched together, listening to the distant shouts of their frustrated pursuers. "It's our only chance to survive the night and hide our trail." Approaching a herd of wild buffalo in darkness was a desperate gamble. Rebecca led the way, with Sarah carrying the now semi-conscious Emma. They moved in short bursts, freezing whenever the massive beasts stirred or raised their heads. "We need to reach the outer edge of the herd," Rebecca whispered. "The animals on the perimeter will be more alert, but there's no way to penetrate deeper without causing a stampede." The bitter cold worked in their favor. The buffalo remained tightly clustered, conserving heat, their massive bodies radiating warmth that the sisters could feel even yards away. Their dark, shaggy forms created shadows within shadows, potential hiding places if they could get close. Enough! 50 yards from the herd, Rebecca paused, studying the animals' positions. "There!" She pointed to a slight gap between two buffalo on the southeastern edge. "Those two are older bulls. They'll be less skittish than the cows with calves." Moving with agonizing slowness, they approached the chosen spot. The buffalo's musk grew stronger, an earthy, pungent odor that under different circumstances might have been repellent, but now represented their only hope for survival. 20 yards away, a bull raised its massive head, nostrils flaring as it caught their unfamiliar scent. Rebecca froze, scarcely breathing. After what seemed an eternity, the animal lowered its head again, apparently deciding they posed no immediate threat. "Almost there," Rebecca encouraged as they crept the final distance. The warmth emanating from the herd was incredible, like approaching a living furnace in the frigid night air. Just as they reached the edge of the herd, disaster struck. A distant gunshot cracked across the plain. The outlaws still searching, perhaps firing at shadows. The effect on the buffalo was immediate. The animals surged to their feet, heads raised in alarm, massive bodies tensing for flight. "They'll stampede," Sarah gasped, clutching Emma tighter. Rebecca made an instant decision. Instead of retreating, she lunged forward, pulling Sarah and Emma with her into the narrow space between two bulls. The animals, already nervous, shifted away from the human intrusion, but were hemmed in by the rest of the herd. "Stay low," Rebecca ordered. "Move with them if they move, but don't run or they'll run over us." For several breathless minutes, the herd remained poised between stillness and panic. The distant hunters appeared to be moving away, their lanterns tiny pinpricks of light receding toward the horizon. Gradually, the buffalo settled again, though they remained standing, alert to potential danger. The sisters huddled together in their precarious sanctuary, using their bodies to shield Emma from the worst of the elements while absorbing the animal's heat. It was a miserable night, uncomfortable, frightening, and filled with uncertainty, but they survived until dawn, which brought its own challenges. "The hunters will return in daylight," Rebecca whispered as the eastern sky lightened. "We need better shelter and a way to hide our tracks." As if in answer to her concerns, a sharp report echoed across the plain. Not a gunshot this time, but a rifle used for hunting. The buffalo reacted instantly, the herd surging into motion with a thunder of hooves that shook the ground. Rebecca grabbed Sarah and Emma, pulling them down as the massive beasts stampeded. Around them, by some miracle, they avoided being trampled, finding themselves in a churned-up empty space where the herd had been. 50 yards away, a lone buffalo lay on its side, struck by the hunter's bullet. "Down!" Rebecca hissed, pulling them flat as a rider appeared on the horizon. Through the swirling dust, they watched a solitary figure approach the fallen buffalo. Not one of the outlaws, but a native hunter, his straight black hair visible as he dismounted to examine his kill. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered. Rebecca assessed their options quickly. "We're exposed here. The outlaws will spot us easily once they return. This hunter is alone, and what? And not all natives are hostile. Father always said most conflicts arose from misunderstanding, not inherent animosity." Before Sarah could object, Rebecca made her decision. Rising slowly with her hands, Clearly visible, she called out, "Hello, please, we need help." The hunter spun toward her voice, bow instantly in hand with an arrow nocked. He was younger than Rebecca had initially thought, perhaps 25, dressed in buckskins, with quillwork decorations that identified him as Crow, if her father's anthropological lessons served correctly. "Please," Rebecca repeated, keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart. "My sister, a child, we need help." The young man stared at them, his expression shifting from alarm to confusion as he took in their bedraggled appearance. Slowly, he lowered his bow, though he kept the arrow nocked. "White women," he said in accented but understandable English. "Why here? No fort, no wagon." Sarah had risen now too, supporting Emma, who had awakened but remained dazed. "Our wagon train was attacked," she explained. "Everyone else. They killed everyone else." The hunter's eyes narrowed. "Who attack?" "White men," Rebecca answered. "Outlaws. They're still hunting us." This information seemed to shift something in the hunter's assessment. He glanced toward the horizon, then back at the sisters. After a moment's hesitation, he gestured toward the fallen buffalo. "Need meat," he said simply. "Help carry, I help you." It was a fair exchange, pragmatic in a way that transcended cultural differences. Rebecca nodded immediately. "We'll help you butcher it if you show us how." The hunter, who eventually introduced himself as Swift Bear, worked with practiced efficiency, showing the sisters how to help with the butchering process. His initial wariness gradually eased as they demonstrated willingness to work and learn. As they worked, Rebecca explained their situation in greater detail: the wagon train, Dixon's betrayal, the massacre, and the outlaws' specific interest in finding them. Swift Bear listened without interruption, his hands continuing their practiced movements. When she finished, he nodded once. "Bad men, kill for pleasure, not need." He pointed to the horizon. "My people's winter camp, 3 days' ride. Medicine woman there, Grey Willow. She decide, if you stay." It wasn't a promise of sanctuary, but it was more hope than they'd had hours earlier. Rebecca exchanged glances with Sarah, who nodded slightly. "What about the buffalo?" Sarah asked, gesturing to the partially butchered carcass. Swift Bear considered this, then made a suggestion that initially horrified but ultimately saved them. "Take inside," he said, miming a hollowing out motion. "Hide tracks, hide smell, hide from bad men. You want us to get inside the buffalo?" Rebecca clarified, unable to mask her revulsion. Swift Bear nodded. "Clean inside first, then you hide. I lead horse away with meat, make tracks away from you. Come back after dark." The plan was gruesome but brilliant. The outlaws would follow. The most obvious trail, Swift Bear with his laden horse, while the sisters and Emma would remain hidden inside the gutted buffalo carcass, their scent masked by the stronger animal smell. "Will it work?" Sarah whispered to Rebecca as Swift Bear finished removing the internal organs. "It has to," Rebecca answered grimly. "We have no better options." The next few hours tested them in ways their Boston upbringing never could have prepared them for. Swift Bear hollowed out the massive carcass, creating a space just large enough for 2 women and a child to squeeze into. The stench was overwhelming, the confined space claustrophobic, but compared to the fate that awaited them if the outlaws found them, it was bearable. "Stay silent," Swift Bear instructed as he prepared to leave with his horse loaded with meat. "Bad men follow this trail." He pointed to the bloody drag marks he had deliberately created heading east. "I circle back when safe. Maybe 1 day, maybe 2. "What if you don't come back?" Sarah asked, asking the question Rebecca had been avoiding. Swift Bear considered this, then pointed northward. "That way, find river. Follow downstream, find Crow. Winter camp eventually." He handed Rebecca a small knife fashioned from buffalo bone. "For protection, small but sharp." As the hunter rode away, the sisters crawled with Emma into their grisly hiding place. Swift Bear had positioned the carcass. so that they could see out through the bullet hole while remaining hidden from casual observation. The November air, while bitter, would help preserve the carcass long enough for their purposes. "Try to sleep, Emma," Sarah soothed, cradling the traumatized child. "We're safe now." Rebecca wasn't as certain of their safety, but recognized the value of reassuring the girl. Through their small viewing hole, she watched the horizon, praying they wouldn't see riders approaching from the direction of the massacre site. Hours passed in uncomfortable silence. Emma eventually slept, exhaustion overcoming the horror of their situation. Sarah dozed fitfully as well, leaving Rebecca to maintain their vigil. Her education, once the source of such pride, now seemed laughably inadequate for their circumstances. What use was Latin or French literature in this desperate fight for survival? Yet her father's insistence on a broader education than was typical for young women had included practical knowledge too. Astronomy for navigation, basic medical care, and natural history that helped her identify the buffalo herd as a potential sanctuary. Perhaps his unconventional approach to his daughter's learning would prove their salvation after all. Near sunset, Rebecca's vigilance was rewarded or punished by the sight of distant riders approaching from the south. She immediately woke Sarah with a gentle touch, bringing a finger to her lips. "They're coming," she whispered. "At least 5 of them." Sarah's eyes widened in fear, but she nodded, tightening her hold on Emma to ensure the child wouldn't make noise if she awakened. Through their viewing port, they watched the outlaws approach the area where the herd had been. The men spread out, examining the trampled ground and eventually finding the blood trail Swiftbear had deliberately left. "Buffalo Hunter came through," one man called to the others. "Looks like he dragged a kill that way." He pointed along Swiftbear's false trail. "You think the women found him?" another asked. A third rider, whose voice Rebecca recognized with a chill as Dixon's, surveyed the area carefully. "If they did, they'll be following him. These educated types always think Indians are noble savages who'll help them." His tone dripped with contempt. "Follow the blood trail. If we find the hunter, we'll find them." The sisters remained motionless, scarcely breathing as the outlaws conferred. After what seemed an eternity, the men turned their horses to follow Swiftbear's trail, galloping eastward in pursuit of their phantom quarry. Only when the riders had disappeared beyond the horizon did Rebecca allow herself a shuddering breath of relief. "Swiftbear saved our lives," she whispered. "If he comes back," Sarah replied, voicing the doubt that lingered between them. As darkness fell across the plains, bringing with it plummeting temperatures, Rebecca faced the grim possibility that they might have exchanged one form of death for another. If Swiftbear didn't return, they would eventually need to leave their hiding place and attempt to follow his directions to the Crow winter camp. A daunting prospect with no supplies, no proper weapons, and a child to protect. The first stars appeared overhead, visible through their small opening. Rebecca recalled her father teaching them to navigate by the stars, pointing out Polaris and explaining how it had guided travelers for centuries. That knowledge might soon determine whether they lived or died. Dawn broke with painful slowness, the horizon gradually lightening from black to purple to fiery red. Rebecca's body ached from hours of cramped immobility inside their macabre shelter. Beside her, Sarah and Emma still slept, their features pallid in the dim light filtering through the bullet hole. Swiftbear had not returned. Rebecca carefully stretched her limbs as much as the confined space allowed, fighting the stiffness that threatened to cripple her. The temperature had dropped precipitously overnight, and frost now rimmed their viewing port. The cold had one benefit, however. It had slowed the carcass's decay, keeping the worst of the stench at bay. A movement on the horizon snapped Rebecca. To full alertness, she squinted, straining to identify the approaching figure. A rider moving at a steady pace, alone. Hope and fear warred within her as she watched. The rising sun at the rider's back, cast them in silhouette, making identification impossible until they drew closer. "Sarah," Rebecca whispered, gently shaking her sister. "Someone's coming." Sarah woke instantly, her hand tightening protectively around Emma. "Swift Bear?" "I can't tell yet." They watched in tense silence as the rider approached. When the figure was about 200 yards away, Rebecca finally breathed again. "It's him." Swift Bear dismounted 50 yards from their hiding place, approaching on foot with careful glances in all directions. He knelt beside the carcass, speaking softly. "Safe now. Bad men followed trail east, found empty camp I made to trick them. They search there still." Rebecca and Sarah extracted themselves from the buffalo carcass with difficulty, their muscles screaming in protest after nearly 24 hours of confinement. Emma whimpered as they emerged into the bitter morning air, her small face pinched with cold and fear. Swift Bear watched their awkward emergence with a hint of approval in his dark eyes. "You survive. Good." He offered them a small water skin. "Drink, not much, but wet mouth." The sisters took turns sipping the precious water, helping Emma do the same. Rebecca noted that Swift Bear had returned with a second horse, a sturdy, pinto laden with supplies. "Trading post," Swift Bear explained, seeing her questioning look. 3 hours ride, got supplies." He gestured to the bundles. "Blankets, food, woman clothes." "You traded for these things?" Sarah asked. "For us?" Swift Bear nodded, his expression unreadable. "Winter coming. Need proper things or die." Rebecca was struck by the young hunter's practicality. He hadn't rescued them out of abstract compassion, but neither had he abandoned them. His worldview seemed to balance self-interest with a broader sense of responsibility, helping those in need, when possible, without sacrificing his own survival. "Thank you," she said simply. "We'll repay you somehow." Swift Bear handed them each a blanket. "Cover blood clothes. Smell bad." His nose wrinkled slightly, confirming what Rebecca already knew. They reeked of buffalo blood and entrails. The blankets were trade items, rough wool but wonderfully warm. Rebecca wrapped one around Emma while Sarah and she each took one, covering their gore-stained dresses as best they could. "Must ride now," Swift Bear instructed, helping Emma onto the pinto before indicating that Sarah should mount behind her. "Bad men might return." Rebecca hesitated. "Both of us on one horse." Swift Bear shook his head. "You ride with me. 2 horses faster than one with 3 people." It made practical sense, though the prospect of riding pressed against this stranger made Rebecca momentarily uncomfortable. Her Boston sensibilities about propriety seemed absurdly irrelevant given their circumstances, yet old habits died hard. Pushing aside her reservations, Rebecca allowed Swift Bear to help her mount behind him. His body was lean but solid, radiating a surprising warmth. Despite the freezing morning, as they set off northward, she forced herself to hold his waist for balance, her upbringing warring with survival necessity. They rode in silence for several miles, putting distance between themselves and the site of their hideout. Swift Bear maintained a steady pace, occasionally scanning the horizon for pursuit, but mainly focused on making progress. When they paused briefly to rest the horses, Rebecca finally asked the question foremost in her mind. "Why are you helping us?" Swift Bear considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Many reasons." He checked the horse's breathing before continuing. "Bad men killed without honor, women and children." His jaw tightened. "Crow people know this pain. Soldiers sometimes cannot tell difference between peaceful tribe and hostile. There was history in his words, personal experience that Rebecca could only guess at. She waited, sensing he had more to say. "Also," Swift Bear continued after a moment, "Grey Willow had dream. Said I would find lost ones who need help. Said important for future." He shrugged slightly. "Grey Willow's dreams come true, cannot ignore." The mention of dreams would have once prompted skepticism from the professor's daughter, but Rebecca's experiences had shaken her certainty about many things. Who was she to dismiss the premonitions of a tribal medicine woman when conventional wisdom had failed to protect their wagon train? They continued their journey northward throughout the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and share the dried meat and wild berries Swiftbear had brought. Emma gradually became more responsive, accepting food and occasionally pointing at features of the landscape that caught her attention. "Is she your daughter?" Swiftbear asked during one rest stop, nodding toward Emma. "No," Sarah explained. "Her parents were killed in the attack, Dr. and Mrs. Prescott." Swiftbear nodded, accepting this without further comment. In his world, Rebecca realized, orphaned children were likely adopted into the tribe without question. The concept of abandoning a child due to absence of blood relation would probably seem incomprehensible. By late afternoon, the landscape began to change, flat plains giving way to more varied terrain. Low hills appeared on the horizon, and patches of pine and aspen broke the monotony of prairie grass. Swiftbear directed them toward a narrow valley where a small stream wound between sheltering slopes. "Camp here tonight," he announced. Hidden from far eyes, water for horses. The site was well chosen, defensible with good visibility of approaches, close to water and sheltered from the wind by the valley walls. Rebecca watched with interest as Swiftbear efficiently established their camp, noting techniques she might need in the future. While Swiftbear tended the horses, Sarah helped Emma change into the clean clothing he had brought. A simple dress made of soft deerskin, cut down to approximate her size. Though still too large, it was infinitely better than her blood-stained garments. "Your turn," Sarah told Rebecca, holding out a similar dress. "I'll keep watch while you change behind those rocks." The deerskin clothing felt strange against Rebecca's skin, so different from the cotton and wool she was accustomed to, yet it was practical, warmer than her ruined dress, and designed for ease of movement. The matching moccasins, though slightly large, offered better protection than her deteriorating boots. When Swiftbear returned from securing the horses, he nodded approval at their changed appearance. "Better. No blood smell to track," he proceeded, to build a small fire, carefully positioned to minimize visible smoke. From his pack, he produced a pot and what appeared to be dried roots and meat. "Stew," he explained, "strong food for journey." As dusk settled over the valley, they ate the simple but nourishing stew, huddled around the fire's warmth. Emma sat between the sisters, occasionally leaning against one or the other, her small hand sometimes reaching out to touch them as if reassuring herself of their continued presence. "How far to your people's camp?" Rebecca asked as Swiftbear handed out second helpings. "2 more days," he replied. "If weather holds." Sarah glanced at the sky where clouds were gathering above the valley. "Will it snow?" Swiftbear followed her gaze, his expression becoming more serious. "Yes, soon. Need to reach Grey Willow's lodge before big snow comes." Rebecca had noticed his repeated references to Grey Willow rather than to tribal leaders or chiefs. "This medicine woman, she's important to your people," Swiftbear nodded. "Grey Willow is my grandmother, most respected healer in many tribes. Chiefs listen when she speaks." He added another small branch to the fire. "She will decide if you stay with Crow through winter." "And if she decides against us?" Sarah asked quietly. Swiftbear was silent for a moment. "Then I take you to fort before passes close with snow." It was a fair answer, Rebecca thought. He had already done more than could be expected by saving them from the outlaws. If his people couldn't or wouldn't shelter them through winter, the nearest fort would be their only option, though the prospect of explaining their situation to military authorities was daunting. As night deepened, Swiftbear organized their sleeping arrangements with practical efficiency. "I watch first," he said. "Wake you midnight to take turn." Rebecca was touched by this extension of trust, allowing them to take watch rather than guarding them throughout the night. It suggested he had moved beyond seeing them merely as helpless white women in need of rescue. Sarah and Emma quickly fell asleep, exhaustion overwhelming the discomfort of sleeping on the ground with only blankets between them and the cold earth. Rebecca remained awake longer, watching Swiftbear's silhouette against the night sky as he kept vigilant watch from a rocky outcropping near their camp. Her last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was that their lives now depended entirely on this young crow hunter and his medicine woman grandmother. Their fate hung on the decision of people their own society had dismissed as savages, yet who had shown more humanity than the civilized men who had massacred their companions. Sometime, in the deepest part of night, Rebecca was gently shaken awake. Swift Bear knelt beside her, his finger to his lips, signaling silence. He gestured for her to follow him to his watching position, moving with a grace that made barely a sound despite the darkness. "Your watch," he whispered, once they were settled, "on the outcropping. Listen more than look. Night ears better than night eyes." Rebecca nodded, accepting the bone-handled knife he offered. The responsibility was sobering. Her sisters' and Emma's lives might depend on her alertness. "What should I listen for?" "Horse sounds, not our horses," Swift Bear replied simply. "Men talking. Anything that doesn't belong to night." With that, he returned to the campsite, settling into the spot Rebecca had vacated. Within minutes, his breathing had evened into the rhythm of sleep, the ability of a frontier hunter to rest whenever opportunity arose. Alone, on watch, Rebecca's senses gradually sharpened. The night was alive with sounds, the soft babble of the stream, occasional rustles as small creatures moved through underbrush, the distant hooting of an owl. She found herself categorizing each noise, creating a mental map of normal night sounds against which any intrusion would stand out. The vastness of the star-filled sky above her prompted reflection. Just weeks ago, she had been teaching Boston schoolgirls about proper sentence structure and mathematical principles that seemed so important at the time. Now she was keeping watch for murderous outlaws while dressed in Indian clothing, her survival dependent on skills she'd never imagined needing. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her father had often argued for practical education alongside academic learning, insisting that his daughters understand the natural world as well as literary classics. At the time, Rebecca had humored what seemed like his eccentric passion. Now those lessons might be all that stood between them and death. A faint movement at the valley's entrance caught her attention. Rebecca froze, straining her eyes to distinguish shapes in the darkness. For several heart-stopping moments, she watched the area where she detected motion, her hand tightening on the knife. When the shape finally moved again, she released her breath slowly. A deer, nothing more. The animal paused at the valley entrance, head raised to test the wind, before continuing on its solitary way. By the time Swift Bear came to relieve her near dawn, Rebecca had experienced several such moments of alarm, all false, but each sharpening her awareness. She returned to the campsite, feeling strangely accomplished, as if she had passed some unspoken test. "No trouble?" Swift Bear asked as they traded places. "A deer," Rebecca replied, "and something small near the stream. Maybe a raccoon." He nodded, apparently satisfied with her report. "Good ears already. You learn fast." Coming from him, it felt like high praise. Morning arrived with a leaden sky and a biting wind that carried the unmistakable scent of approaching snow. Rebecca awoke to find Swift Bear already breaking camp, his movements efficient but more hurried than the previous day. "Storm coming," he explained, as the sisters helped gather their few belongings. "Need to cover a lot of ground today." They ate a cold breakfast of dried meat and the last of the berries, washing it down with water from the stream. Emma seemed Stronger this morning, her eyes more alert as she watched Swift Bear prepare the horses. The child had spoken very little since the massacre, but her observant gaze missed nothing. "How far today?" Sarah asked as Swift Bear helped her mount behind Emma. "Push hard, reach Medicine Rocks by nightfall," he replied, securing their blankets. "Behind the saddle." "Sacred place, good shelter in storm." Rebecca recognized the strain in his voice, their lives balanced on a knife's edge of timing, reaching the tribal camp before the weather made travel impossible. If they became stranded in the worsening conditions, their chances of survival would diminish rapidly. They rode out as the first snowflakes began to fall, tiny crystalline messengers of the storm to come. Swift Bear set a faster pace than the previous day, stopping less frequently and for shorter periods. The landscape changed as they traveled northward, the rolling plains giving way to more broken terrain with scattered stands of pine and rocky outcroppings. By midday, the snow fell steadily, reducing visibility and creating a hushed world of white. Swift Bear navigated with unwavering confidence, occasionally pointing out landmarks visible only to his experienced eye. Rebecca found herself increasingly impressed by his woodcraft, the ability to maintain direction and purpose when, to her, one snow-covered hill looked much like another. During a brief stop to rest the horses, Rebecca noticed Emma watching Swift Bear with particular intensity as he checked the animal's hooves for snow buildup. "What are you thinking, Emma?" she asked gently, the first direct question she'd posed to the child since their escape. Emma didn't respond immediately, her gaze still fixed on the crow hunter. Finally, in a voice so soft Rebecca had to lean closer to hear, she said, "Father said Indians were dangerous, but he's helping us." The simple observation held volumes of unspoken complexity. At 6, Emma was confronting the contradiction between what she'd been taught about native peoples and the reality of their rescue by one. Rebecca considered how to respond. "People are individuals, Emma," she said carefully. "Some are kind, some cruel, regardless of whether they're white or Indian. Swift Bear is helping us because he's a good person, not because of or despite being Crow." Emma seemed to absorb this, her small brow furrowed in thought. "The bad men who hurt Mama and Papa were white," she observed with the devastating directness of childhood. "Like us." "Yes," Rebecca acknowledged, seeing no value in shielding the child from this truth. "They were." Their conversation was interrupted as Swift Bear returned. "Move now," he urged, storm growing stronger. Indeed, the snowfall had intensified, thick flakes swirling in gusting winds that cut through their blankets and clothing. As they continued their journey, Rebecca found herself pressing closer against Swift Bear's back, seeking warmth while fighting the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. The afternoon became a monotonous struggle against the elements. Time seemed to blur, marked only by the steady rhythm of the horse's labored breathing and the occasional commands Swift Bear called back to Sarah, ensuring her horse stayed close. "Look," Swift Bear finally announced, pointing ahead through the curtain of white. "Medicine Rocks." Rebecca squinted, making out massive stone formations looming through the storm. Towering pillars and arches of weathered sandstone, their strange shapes giving them an almost sentient appearance. Even half obscured by snow, they presented an otherworldly sight, as if giants had arranged the stones according to some mysterious design. "What are they?" Sarah asked, her voice raised against the wind. "Sacred place," Swift Bear replied. "Spirits live in rocks, give visions to those who seek with pure hearts." He guided his horse toward the formation's base. Good shelter among them. As they drew closer, Rebecca understood his meaning. Wind and water had carved numerous alcoves and small caves into the sandstone, creating natural shelters from the elements. Swift Bear led them to one such formation, a deep recess beneath an overhanging ledge, large enough to accommodate them and the horses. The relief of being out of the driving snow was immediate. The natural stone walls blocked the worst of the wind, creating a pocket of relative calm. Swift Bear wasted no time establishing their camp, setting the sisters to gathering what dry wood could be found, while he created a small fire pit near. The cave's entrance. "Will anyone else seek shelter here?" Rebecca asked, thinking of the outlaws or other potential threats. Swift Bear shook his head. "White men avoid. Believe places haunted." A hint of amusement crossed his face. "Good for us." With practiced skill, he coaxed a small fire into existence, using materials from his pack and the meager wood they'd gathered. The flames cast dancing shadows across the stone walls, transforming their shelter into a realm between worlds. As Sarah helped Emma change into dry clothes from their packs, Rebecca found herself drawn to strange markings on the cave's interior. Walls. Upon closer inspection, she realized they were pictographs, stylized human and animal figures, handprints, and abstract symbols painted in red and black pigments. "Very old," Swift Bear explained, noticing her interest. "Many generations of people shelter here, leave marks to show they passed through." He pointed to different groupings. "These Blackfoot, these Shoshone, these my people, Absaroka, what whites call Crow." Rebecca studied the images with growing fascination. Her father had collected books on native pictography, but seeing these, ancient communications firsthand, was entirely different. "What do they say?" she asked. Swift Bear moved beside her, pointing to specific groupings. "This tells of great buffalo hunt. This speaks of victory against enemies." His finger traced a more complex scene. "This shows medicine woman's vision when stars fell from sky." "A meteor shower," Rebecca murmured, recognizing the astronomical event depicted. Swift Bear glanced at her with new interest. "You know, falling stars. My father was a professor, a teacher of natural science," she explained. "He taught us about celestial events. The stars that fall aren't actually stars, but smaller celestial bodies entering Earth's atmosphere." Instead of dismissing this information, Swift Bear considered it thoughtfully. "Different words, same understanding," he finally said. "Crow say spirits racing across sky. You say meteor. Both know it brings change." His perspective surprised Rebecca, not rejecting scientific explanation, but placing it alongside traditional understanding, rather than viewing them as mutually exclusive. It suggested a flexibility of thought she hadn't expected. As evening descended, they huddled around the small fire, sharing a meal Swift Bear prepared from their dwindling supplies. Emma had begun to show more animation, occasionally asking simple questions about their surroundings or the equipment Swift Bear used. "Tomorrow reach Crow winter camp?" Sarah asked as they finished eating. Swift Bear's expression grew more serious. "If storm allows. 1 day's journey still." He gestured toward the cave entrance, where snow continued to fall heavily. "Dangerous. Travel in deep snow. What if we can't reach your camp tomorrow?" Rebecca pressed. "Stay here longer," he replied pragmatically. "Wait for storm to pass. Shelter good but food limited." He added a small branch to their fire. Better to try, if possible. The gravity of their situation hung over them as they prepared for sleep. Swift Bear arranged their blankets to maximize warmth, placing Emma between the sisters near the fire, while he took a position closer to the entrance. As before, he explained their watch schedule, him first, then Rebecca, with Sarah remaining with Emma throughout the night. As darkness claimed their shelter and the fire burned low, Rebecca found sleep elusive despite her exhaustion. Her mind kept returning to the pictographs, generations of people seeking refuge in this same space, leaving their marks as testament to their passage. Would anyone know their story if they didn't survive this journey? Would they simply disappear? like so many others on the vast frontier. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound, Emma whimpering in her sleep, caught in the grip of nightmares Rebecca could only imagine. Sarah instinctively drew the child closer, murmuring reassurances without fully waking. The simple gesture of comfort in the face of overwhelming trauma touched Rebecca deeply. Whatever came next, she resolved, Emma would not face it alone. The child had lost everything, her parents, her security, her understanding of the world. The least Rebecca and Sarah could offer was continuity of care, a thread of stability in a life shattered by violence. When Swift Bear woke her for the middle watch, Rebecca found the storm had intensified. Snow had drifted against the cave entrance, nearly blocking the opening. The wind howled through the rock formations, creating eerie whistles and moans that might indeed convince superstitious travelers of supernatural presence. "Bad storm," Swift Bear said simply as they changed positions. "Watch fire. Keep small but alive." Rebecca nodded, accepting both the practical instruction and the implicit concern. If the fire died, the dropping temperature could become dangerous, particularly for Emma. Alone on watch, Rebecca fed small pieces of their precious firewood to the flames, maintaining the delicate balance between conservation and necessity. The dancing light illuminated the ancient pictographs, creating the unsettling illusion that the figures moved across the stone surface. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury. Rebecca could scarcely see beyond the cave entrance. The world beyond transformed into a howling white void. The prospect of traveling through such conditions seemed impossible, yet remaining meant depleting their limited supplies with no guarantee of improvement. A subtle movement from Swift Bear's direction caught her attention. The hunter sat up silently, his head tilted in a listening posture that immediately put Rebecca on alert. She hadn't heard anything beyond the storm, but his expression confirmed something had disturbed him. He moved to her side like a shadow, his voice barely audible. "Horses nervous. Something outside." Rebecca strained her ears, but could detect nothing unusual amid the storm's cacophony. Swift Bear, however, reached for his knife with deliberate slowness, his entire body tense with readiness. For several breathless minutes, they waited, Rebecca following Swift Bear's gaze toward the partially snow-blocked entrance. Just as she began to wonder if he had misinterpreted the horse's restlessness, a dark shape moved past their limited field of vision, something large, passing close to their shelter. "Bear," Swift Bear whispered, his grip on the knife tightening. "Grizzly. Should be in winter sleep already. Very dangerous if hungry." Rebecca's mouth went dry. She had read accounts of grisly encounters. Few ended well for the humans involved. Even those with firearms, their small knives would offer little protection if the massive predator discovered their presence. Swift Bear motioned for her to remain absolutely still. The horses stomped nervously but remained quiet, perhaps sensing that noise might attract unwanted attention. Long minutes passed as they listened to the bear moving around the exterior of their shelter, occasionally snuffling at the snowdrift, partially blocking the entrance. Rebecca found herself holding her breath each time the animal approached the opening, fearing it would push through the snow barrier at any moment. The fire had burned down to embers, offering minimal light but also making their shelter less obvious. After what seemed an eternity, the sounds of the bear's investigation receded, eventually disappearing into the howling storm. Swift Bear remained, tensely alert for several more minutes before finally relaxing slightly. "Gone for now," he murmured, "but will return if smells food." "Should we put out the fire completely?" Rebecca asked, thinking of the smoke that might attract the predator. Swift Bear shook his head. "Fire keeps bear away, fears flame." He carefully added a small piece of wood to the embers, but must keep all food up high, away from ground scent. Together, they secured their remaining provisions in a pack suspended from a protruding rock near the ceiling. Only when this task was complete did Swift Bear return to his sleeping place, though Rebecca noticed he positioned himself more strategically between the entrance and the others. The remainder of her watch passed without further incident, though Rebecca found herself jumping at every sound, imagining the grizzly's return with each gust of wind. When the time came to wake Sarah for the final watch, Rebecca hesitated, wondering if she should mention the bear. "Tell her," Swift Bear said softly from his position, apparently awake despite his closed eyes. "Knowledge keeps fear smaller." It was sound advice. Rebecca briefed her sister on their nocturnal visitor, explaining Swift Bear's precautions while trying not to unduly frighten her. Sarah received the information with remarkable composure, asking practical questions about what to watch for and how to respond if the bear returned. As Rebecca finally settled into her blankets beside Emma, exhaustion quickly overcame residual fear. Her last conscious thought was that their survival increasingly depended not just on Swift Bear's protection, but on their own ability to adapt and respond to unfamiliar threats, a transformation from passive victims to active participants in their own rescue. Dawn arrived with muted light filtering through the snow-blocked entrance. Rebecca woke to find Swift Bear already assessing their situation, carefully clearing enough snow to peer outside. His expression as he returned to their small fire told her everything before he spoke. Deep snow, still falling, trail covered. He sat cross-legged, accepting the small portion of dried meat Sarah offered. Must wait. The simple statement carried significant implications. Each day delayed was another day of depleted supplies, another day for the outlaws to widen their search, another day that might push their arrival at the Crow camp beyond possibility before winter fully descended. "How long?" Sarah asked, distributing the morning meal with careful attention to equal portions. Swift Bear studied the cave entrance. "Cannot say. Storm speaks with its own voice." He accepted a small cup of melted snow water. "One day, maybe two." Rebecca forced herself to eat slowly, savoring each bite of the increasingly precious food. They had perhaps 3 days of provisions remaining at their current rationing. Beyond that, they would need to find alternative sources of nourishment, a daunting prospect in the depths of a Wyoming winter. Emma sat quietly between them, her small fingers tracing the ancient pictographs on the wall beside her. Something about the images seemed to comfort the child, perhaps their testament to human perseverance across centuries. "What do these mean?" she asked suddenly, pointing to a particular grouping, stylized human figures surrounded by wavy lines. Swift Bear leaned closer, studying the markings. "Old story. People trapped by great flood. Medicine woman leads them to high ground." His finger traced the spiral pattern above the figures. Her dream showed safe path. Emma considered this story of ancient salvation. "Like you're helping us?" The question's innocent directness brought a rare smile to Swift Bear's face. "Yes, little one. Same story in different time." The parallel seemed to satisfy Emma, who nodded solemnly before returning to her breakfast. Rebecca exchanged glances with Sarah, both recognizing this interaction as the longest conversation the child had initiated since the massacre. With travel impossible, they settled into the confined routine of waiting out the storm. Swift Bear taught the sisters how to fashion simple snares from materials in his pack. "Just in case," he explained, though all understood the growing possibility they might need to trap small game if their supplies ran out. Rebecca, drawing on her father's naturalist teachings, organized what remained of their provisions, calculating minimum portions that would sustain them without causing weakness. Sarah, meanwhile, engaged Emma in creating stories about the pictographs, an educational diversion that kept the child's mind occupied while developing her imagination. As morning gave way to afternoon with no change in the storm's intensity, Swift Bear grew increasingly restless. "Need to check wider area," he finally announced. "Make sure Bear not sleeping nearby." "Is that safe?" Rebecca asked, concerned about him venturing out alone in the blizzard. "Safer than surprises," he replied, pragmatically. "Not go far, follow rock wall, always keep shelter in sight." They helped him layer additional clothing from their packs. Before departing, he gave final instructions. "Keep fire small. If not back before dark, block entrance with more snow. Wait one day, then follow creek downstream when storm ends." The matter-of-fact contingency plan for his possible non-return sent a chill through Rebecca that had nothing to do with the temperature. She had not realized how completely they had come to depend on Swift Bear's knowledge and skills. Without him, their chances of reaching the Crow camp diminished dramatically. After his departure, the cave seemed unnaturally quiet, despite the constant background of wind and occasional shifting of the horses. Rebecca busied herself organizing their belongings, while Sarah continued Emma's improvised education, now focusing on practical matters like identifying cardinal directions and recognizing basic constellations that could guide them if necessary. "Do you think we'll reach the Crow camp?" Sarah asked quietly when Emma had dozed off, the question they'd both been avoiding. Rebecca considered her answer carefully. "I think Swift Bear will get us there if anyone can. Beyond that," she gestured to the storm outside, "nature has its own plans." Sarah nodded, accepting this realistic assessment. "What do you make of his grandmother, this medicine woman he speaks of with such reverence?" "I'm not sure," Rebecca admitted. "Father always said tribal healers combined practical medicine with spiritual practices. Some were remarkably effective, particularly with herbal treatments. And if she doesn't welcome us?" Rebecca had considered this possibility extensively during her night watches. "Then we face another challenge. But remember, Swift Bear said he would take us to a fort if that happens. We're not without options." Their conversation was interrupted by a sound at the entrance, snow being cleared away. Relief flooded through Rebecca as Swift Bear appeared, his clothing laden with fresh snow, but his expression more animated than when he'd left. "Storm weakening," he announced, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Sky lighter to north. Maybe travel tomorrow." The news lifted their spirits considerably. Even one more day of progress toward the Crow camp would improve their prospects for survival. As Swift Bear warmed himself by the fire, he shared what he'd observed during his scouting. Bear gone. Tracks lead west. He extended his hands toward the flames. Found rabbit frozen in snow. Good meat tonight. From within his jacket, he produced a small hare, already stiff from cold. Rebecca marveled at his fortune in finding such unexpected provision, though she suspected luck had little to do with it. Swift Bear's keen observation skills likely spotted subtle signs of the animal's presence that would have been invisible to her. While the sisters watched with interest, Swift Bear demonstrated how to properly dress the rabbit, explaining each step as he worked. The process was methodical and respectful, no part of the animal wasted. He showed them how the fur could be preserved for later use, how certain organs provided concentrated nutrition, how even the bones could serve as tools or be boiled for broth. "In Boston, we simply purchased meat already prepared," Sarah observed, watching him slice the rabbit into portions for cooking. "This feels more connected to our survival." Swift Bear nodded understanding. When hunter knows where meat comes from, gives proper thanks, makes stronger bond with world. He arranged the meat on improvised skewers. White people often forget this connection. Rebecca reflected on the truth in his statement. Their city, upbringing, had insulated them from the direct relationship between life, death, and sustenance. that frontier dwellers, both native and settler, experience daily. This lesson in survival carried philosophical dimensions their father would have appreciated. The rabbit, though small, provided their first fresh meat in days. Swift Bear insisted Emma receive the liver. Best strength, he explained, while ensuring everyone got equal portions of the limited flesh. The meal, supplemented with the last of their dried berries, felt like a feast after days of increasingly sparse rations. As they ate, Swift Bear shared his plan for the following day. Leave at first light if storm stops. Travel northeast, follow Medicine Creek, reach Crow Camp before next nightfall, if no new snow. His confidence raised Rebecca's hopes, though she noted the qualifying "if" in his statement. Wyoming weather in November was notoriously unpredictable, a reality she was coming to appreciate firsthand. After their meal, Swift Bear fashioned a simple toy for Emma from rabbit bones and sinew, a small articulated figure that could be manipulated to dance when operated correctly. The child's delight at this unexpected gift was the first true smile they had seen from her since the massacre. She practiced the precise movements required to animate the figure, her concentration absolute. "You're good with children," Rebecca observed quietly as they watched Emma demonstrate her new skill to Sarah. Swift Bear's expression softened slightly. "Had younger sister, yellow flower. Fever took her 2 winters ago." The simple statement contained volumes of unspoken grief. Was 7 summers, like making little ones happy now. The glimpse into his personal history added dimension to Rebecca's understanding of their rescuer. She had initially seen him primarily through the lens of their situation, as guide, protector, and cultural interpreter. This reminder of his humanity beyond those roles deepened her respect for him. As evening settled over their shelter, the storm's voice changed subtly. The constant howl moderating to intermittent gusts, the furious snowfall easing to lighter, scattered flurries. Swift Bear stepped outside briefly to confirm what his experienced ears had detected. "Storm passing," he reported upon returning. "Stars visible in north sky." His relief was evident, despite his typically reserved expression. "Good travel tomorrow." If holds, they settled into their now familiar sleeping arrangements, with Swift Bear taking first watch. Before closing her eyes, Rebecca noticed Emma carefully placing her bone figurine beside her makeshift pillow, a small gesture of normalcy amid extraordinary circumstances. When Swift Bear woke Rebecca for the middle watch, his whispered update was encouraging. "Storm gone, clear sky, many stars, cold but good for travel." Rebecca took her position by the cave entrance, where a small opening now revealed a transformed world outside. The snowstorm had draped the landscape in pristine white, smoothing the rugged terrain into gentle contours, glowing silver blue under brilliant moonlight. Stars crowded the black velvet sky in numbers she had never witnessed in Boston, their clarity and abundance breathtaking. The beauty of the scene struck Rebecca powerfully. This same snow that threatened their survival also created transcendent loveliness. The frontier's duality of peril and magnificence had never been more apparent. During her quiet watch, Rebecca found herself reflecting on the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. Their original plan, the safe, predictable route to their uncle's home in Oregon, had been violently derailed. Yet this catastrophic deviation had shown them strengths within themselves they might never have discovered otherwise. Sarah, always the gentler sister, had revealed unexpected resilience and practical ingenuity. Emma, traumatized but not broken, demonstrated remarkable adaptability for one so young, and Rebecca herself had been forced to abandon comfortable certainties about the world and her place in it, a disorienting but ultimately expanding experience. As for Swift Bear, he defied. Every simplistic notion she had absorbed about native peoples. His intelligence, honor, and complex worldview challenged the convenient categories white society used to distance itself from those it displaced. Through him, Rebecca had glimpsed an entirely different way of understanding the relationship between humans and the natural world, not as adversaries, but as interconnected participants in a greater whole. When dawn finally approached, Rebecca woke Sarah for the final watch with renewed optimism. The weather had held throughout the night, and the promise of progress toward their destination energized her, despite the challenges that still lay ahead. "We leave soon," Swiftbear announced as the first light touched the eastern horizon. "Long journey today." As they prepared to depart, gathering their few possessions and readying the horses, Rebecca noticed Emma standing before the cave wall, her small hand placed on one particular pictograph, a simple handprint left by some ancient child, perhaps her own age. Without prompting, Emma placed her palm against the ancient marking, her small fingers aligning with those impressed in pigment generations earlier. The gesture, connecting past and present, acknowledging continuity amid upheaval, brought unexpected tears to Rebecca's eyes. Some things transcended cultural differences and temporal boundaries. The human instinct to leave evidence of existence, to connect across time through the simplest of gestures. In that moment, watching Emma's silent communion with a child from centuries past, Rebecca understood something fundamental about survival that went beyond mere physical perseverance. When they finally emerged from their rocky shelter into the brilliant morning light, the vastness of the snow-covered landscape was momentarily overwhelming. Yet Swiftbear moved forward with quiet confidence, leading them onto a path invisible to Rebecca's eyes, but clear in his understanding of the terrain. They had survived the storm. Now, the greater challenge awaited, reaching the Crow Winter camp and whatever reception its medicine woman might offer 3 unexpected visitors from another world. Their progress through the snow-transformed landscape was slower than Swiftbear had hoped, but steady. He led them along a route that followed natural contours of the land, seeking places where wind had scoured the snow to more manageable depths. Even so, the horses struggled at times, their legs sinking into drifts that reached their chests in low-lying areas. By midday, the sun had emerged fully, its brilliance against the snow, creating a dazzling effect that forced them to narrow their eyes to slits. Swiftbear fashioned makeshift snow shields for them from pieces of birch bark in his pack, curved segments with narrow slits that reduced the glare while maintaining visibility. "Snow blindness dangerous," he explained as he adjusted Emma's shield. "Eyes burn, then see nothing, bad in winter country." The simple innovation demonstrated once again his practical knowledge, the kind absent from Boston school books, but essential in this environment. Rebecca found herself cataloging these lessons, mentally preserving skills that might mean the difference between life and death in their new reality. They paused briefly at midday in the shelter of a pine grove, sharing the last of the rabbit meat while the horses rested. Swiftbear studied the sky with careful attention, his expression revealing concern at clouds building on the northwestern horizon. "More weather coming," he observed. "Need to cross Medicine Creek before next snow." Rebecca followed his gaze to a valley ahead where a dark line snaked through the white landscape, the creek still flowing despite the season. Its banks were lined with cottonwoods and willows, their bare branches creating a skeletal latticework against the snow. "Is it deep?" Sarah asked, clearly thinking of Emma. "Spring snow melt makes deep," Swiftbear replied. "Winter makes shallow, but cold, very cold." The emphasis conveyed the danger clearly. Immersion in such temperatures could be fatal without immediate warmth and dry clothing. They resumed their journey with renewed urgency, the approaching weather system adding pressure to their timeline. As they descended toward the creek, Rebecca noticed Swiftbear becoming increasingly alert, his gaze systematically scanning their surroundings with particular attention to the tree line along the water. "What are you watching for?" she asked quietly. "Many things," he replied, without shifting his vigilance. "Wolf tracks in new snow, smoke from wrong fires, signs of other people." After a moment he added, "This place, border territory. Sometimes Blackfoot hunters come here, not all friendly to Crow." The reminder of additional dangers beyond weather and outlaws was sobering. Rebecca had almost forgotten that tribal territories and relationships added another layer of complexity to their situation. What appeared to her as undifferentiated wilderness was in fact a landscape of invisible boundaries, alliances, and conflicts that Swift Bear navigated as carefully as the physical terrain. When they reached the creek's edge, Swift Bear dismounted. To test the crossing, the water ran swift but relatively shallow, perhaps 3 feet at its deepest point. He probed several areas with a branch, checking for hidden holes or unstable footing before selecting their route. "I go first with Emma," he decided. "Test each step. You follow exactly same path." The crossing strategy made sense. Swift Bear, being the strongest swimmer if accident occurred, with Emma the most vulnerable. He helped transfer the child to his horse, securing her carefully before leading his mount into the frigid water. Rebecca and Sarah watched anxiously as man and child navigated the creek, the horse advancing cautiously with each step. Near the center, where the current ran strongest, the animal balked momentarily, clearly distressed by the cold. Swift Bear spoke soothingly in Crow, one hand on the horse's neck, guiding the nervous animal forward until it regained confidence. When they reached the opposite bank safely, Swift Bear secured Emma in the shelter of a fallen log before returning to the water's edge to guide the sisters across. "Step exactly where my horse stepped," he called. "Watch for darker water means deeper." Rebecca went first, her breath catching as the icy water soaked through her moccasins and leggings. By midstream, her feet had lost all sensation, replaced by a burning pain that made each step an act of will. The horse sensed her tension, its movements becoming more hesitant, until Swift Bear's calming words from the bank steadied them both. When all had crossed safely, Swift Bear worked quickly to restore circulation to their extremities. He removed their wet footwear, rubbing their feet vigorously with dry cloths from his pack before providing replacement moccasins lined with rabbit fur, items Rebecca hadn't known were among their supplies. "Always carry dry foot coverings in winter country," he explained, helping Emma with her new footwear. "Wet feet bring death faster than hunger." The practical wisdom reminded Rebecca how precarious their survival remained despite their progress. One miscalculation, one piece of overlooked equipment, could prove fatal in this unforgiving environment. As if emphasizing this reality, the wind shifted suddenly, bringing colder air and the first scattered snowflakes from the approaching system. Swift Bear glanced at the darkening northwestern sky, his expression tightening. "Must move quickly now," he said, helping them remount. "Storm follows us." They continued eastward with increased urgency, the terrain gradually changing as they traveled. The open plains gave way to more varied topography, rolling hills interspersed with stands of pine and aspen, rock formations jutting from the snow like sentinels. Swift Bear pointed to a distant line of darker hills. "Crow winter camp beyond those hills," he explained. "Sheltered valley with hot springs. Snow comes less there." The knowledge that their destination lay within achievable distance raised Rebecca's spirits despite her physical discomfort. They had survived the worst of the elements, evaded pursuers, and now approached potential sanctuary. For the first time since the massacre, a cautious optimism seemed justified. This nascent hope was tested, however, as the afternoon waned and the weather deteriorated more rapidly than anticipated. The scattered snowflakes became a steady fall, driven horizontally by strengthening winds that bit through their clothing and reduced visibility to less than 50 yards. Not reach camp before dark, Swiftbear acknowledged, surveying their options. Need shelter for night, the admission. Clearly frustrated him, but Rebecca recognized his pragmatism. Pushing forward in worsening conditions risked disorientation and exhaustion, potentially fatal errors when so close to their goal. Swiftbear led them toward a cluster of massive boulders at the base of a small bluff, where wind-fallen pines created a natural windbreak. It wasn't the protection of medicine rocks, but it offered enough shelter to establish a defensible camp for the night. Working together with the efficiency born of shared experience, they established their temporary haven. Swiftbear and Rebecca secured the horses in the most protected area, while Sarah created a small snow barrier to further block the wind. Emma, now actively participating in their survival efforts, gathered pine boughs under Sarah's direction to create insulated bedding. With nightfall approaching and the storm intensifying, Swiftbear made a decision that revealed the gravity of their situation. From a special pouch, he removed a small bundle wrapped in oiled buckskin, emergency provisions apparently reserved for dire circumstances. Pemmican, he explained, unwrapping the dense mixture of dried meat, berries, and fat. Strong food. Special make by Grey Willow? He divided it with careful precision, ensuring each received equal sustenance. The concentrated nourishment provided energy that spread warmth through Rebecca's body, tempering the cold that had settled into her bones. During their creek crossing, she watched Emma's reaction to the unfamiliar food with amusement, initial suspicion giving way to appreciation as the child discovered its sweet, savory flavor. As they huddled together beneath their blankets, the wind howling around their shelter and snow accumulating against their makeshift barricade, Swiftbear shared more details about their destination, perhaps to bolster their resolve, or simply to pass the time until sleep claimed them. Crow. Winter camp's special place, he explained, his voice carrying above the storm's voice. Hot water comes from earth, never freezes, makes warm air around camp, less snow. His expression softened with what might have been homesickness. Lodges stay warm, food stored well, children play even in winter. The description painted a stark contrast to their current circumstances. Cold, exposed, and surviving on emergency. Rations. Rebecca found herself longing for this haven of relative comfort while recognizing that their reception remained uncertain. "Tell us about Grey Willow," Sarah requested, voicing the question foremost in both sisters' minds. "What should we expect?" Swiftbear considered this carefully before responding. Grey Willow sees with two sets of eyes, world eyes and spirit eyes, speaks with two voices, practical voice and vision voice. He gestured to emphasize his explanation. Very wise, very old. Remembers time before many white people came. Will she help us? Rebecca asked directly. Swiftbear's expression remained neutral. Depends what spirit eyes see in you. After a moment he added, Grey Willow not like most whites, but respects honest hearts regardless of skin. It was a fair assessment, Rebecca. He thought, not offering false assurance, but suggesting their sincere intentions might count more than their origin. She found herself wondering what this enigmatic medicine woman would perceive in them. 3 battered survivors carrying the trauma of violence and desperate flight. The storm's intensity increased as night deepened. Swiftbear organized watches as before, though the driving snow made external threats less likely. When Rebecca's turn came, she found maintaining alertness particularly challenging. The monotonous howl of wind, the bone-deep fatigue, and the hypnotic effect of swirling snowflakes all conspired to dull her senses. To combat this dangerous lethargy, she forced herself to plan for various contingencies. If the Crow welcomed them, what role might she and Sarah establish in the camp? If refused, how would they survive at a military fort? What future could they create for Emma, now essentially orphaned? The practical problems requiring solutions helped keep her mind active during the long, cold hours of her vigil. Near the end of her watch, as the storm began to moderate slightly, Rebecca detected movement at the edge of their shelter's limited visibility. She tensed, reaching instinctively for the knife Swiftbear had given her, eyes straining to penetrate the swirling snow. The shape materialized again, larger than a wolf, but moving with four-legged grace. As it came closer, features resolved. Through the whiteness, a magnificent elk, its antlers carrying small drifts of snow, moving deliberately across their line of sight about 30 yards distant. The animal paused, seeming to look directly at Rebecca, its breath creating cloudy puffs in the frigid air. For a long moment, they regarded each other across the divide of species, fellow travelers in the storm's dominion. Then, with unhurried dignity, the elk continued on its path, disappearing once more into the curtain of falling snow. The encounter left Rebecca with an unexpected sense of communion. The elk had acknowledged their presence without fear or aggression, simply recognizing fellow beings in a shared landscape. Something about this brief connection resonated deeply, as if confirming they belonged here despite the hardships, that survival was possible even in the harshest conditions. When Swiftbear relieved her, she mentioned the elk sighting. His reaction surprised her. A look of intense interest followed, by what appeared to be satisfaction. "Good sign," he said simply. "Elk spirit strong medicine, especially in storm, means right path." Rebecca might once have dismissed such interpretation as superstition. Now, after all they had experienced, she found herself open to different ways of reading meaning into the world's events. Whether coincidence or spiritual significance, the elk's appearance had lifted her spirits. Perhaps that was medicine enough. Dawn arrived with blessed calm, the storm having spent its fury during the night. They emerged from their shelter to find nearly a foot of fresh snow blanketing the landscape, transforming it once again into an untouched wilderness. The air had turned sharply colder, but the clear sky promised good visibility for the final leg of their journey. Swiftbear studied the distant hill line, then the position of the rising sun. "Half day to Crow Camp if snow not too deep for horses," he estimated. "Reach before midday if good travel." As they prepared to depart, Emma suddenly tugged at Rebecca's sleeve, pointing eastward with excitement. "Look!" Following her direction, Rebecca gasped softly. The rising sun had created a phenomenon she had read about, but never witnessed: sundogs. Brilliant, rainbow-hued spots flanked the sun, connected by a faint halo of prismatic light arcing. "Through the crisp air, ice crystals in the air," she explained to Emma, recalling her scientific education. "They reflect and refract sunlight like tiny prisms." Swiftbear, overhearing, offered his own interpretation. "Crow say, sun brings spirit children when important day comes." He studied the phenomenon thoughtfully. Good omen for arriving at camp. The convergence of scientific explanation and spiritual meaning struck Rebecca as emblematic of their journey. Different perspectives illuminating the same reality, neither invalidating the other. With this auspicious sign brightening their path, they set out on the final stretch toward the Crow winter camp and whatever reception awaited them there. The final leg of their journey unfolded across a landscape transformed by the previous nights. Snowfall. Swiftbear broke trail, his horse laboring through drifts that sometimes reached its chest. Rebecca and Sarah followed in his tracks, Emma now riding with Rebecca to distribute weight more evenly between the tired mounts. As they crested a rise mid-morning, Swiftbear halted, gesturing for them to join him. Below stretched a sheltered valley, nestled between protective ridges, their destination. Even from a distance, Rebecca could see why the location had been chosen for winter encampment. The valley's contours provided natural windbreaks, while dark patches revealed areas where hot springs prevented snow accumulation. Absaroka Winter Camp, Swiftbear announced, a note of pride evident in his voice. 42 lodges, my people. From their elevated vantage point, the camp presented an orderly arrangement of conical teepees, arranged in a great circle, with larger structures at the center that Swiftbear identified as council and ceremonial lodges. Thin columns of smoke rose from fire holes, creating a hazy canopy that hung in the still air above the encampment. "It's beautiful," Sarah murmured, and Rebecca had to agree. The geometric precision of the camp against the backdrop of untamed wilderness created a striking harmony, human presence integrated with, rather than imposed upon, the natural world. Swiftbear pointed to a teepee slightly separate from the others, positioned near what appeared to be steaming pools. "Grey Willow's Lodge," he explained, "near healing waters. We go there first." As they descended toward the valley, Rebecca noted increasing signs of activity in the camp. Their approach had been spotted, and several figures now moved to the perimeter, watching their progress. When they reached the valley floor, 2 mounted men rode out to meet them. Scouts or guards, Rebecca surmised. Swiftbear raised his hand in greeting, calling out in Crow. A rapid exchange followed, the other men's gazes repeatedly shifting. To the sisters and Emma, with expressions ranging from surprise to wariness. Finally, one rider wheeled his horse and galloped back toward the camp, while the other fell in beside them, escorting rather than intercepting. "What did you tell them?" Rebecca asked. "Truth," Swiftbear replied simply. "Found you after Wagon Massacre. Outlaws hunting you, seeking Grey Willow's wisdom about your path." The response confirmed what Rebecca had observed about Swiftbear's character, direct, without embellishment or strategic omission. She appreciated his straightforwardness, but wondered how his people would receive 3 white refugees, especially with tensions between settlers and tribes growing more pronounced. Each year, as they approached the camp's edge, more Crow gathered to witness their arrival. Children darted between adults for better views, their curious faces showing none of the reservation evident in their elders. Rebecca was struck by the range of expressions among the assembled people, some openly hostile, others merely curious, a few showing what might have been compassion. They proceeded directly to Grey Willow's lodge, where a small crowd had already gathered. Swiftbear dismounted and helped the sisters and Emma down, speaking quietly. "Let me talk first. Stand straight. Show respect, but not fear. Meet eyes directly when spoken to." The simple protocol guidance was appreciated. Rebecca had no wish to inadvertently offend through ignorance of Crow customs. She straightened her buckskin dress as best she could and helped Emma do the same, wanting to present themselves with dignity despite their trail-worn appearance. Before Swiftbear could announce their presence, the lodge flap opened. A woman emerged who could only be Grey Willow. Rebecca's first impression was of extraordinary presence rather than physical attributes. Though clearly advanced in years, perhaps 70 or beyond, the medicine woman stood straight-backed and moved with deliberate grace. Her face told the story of a life fully lived, deep lines etched by weather, laughter, and sorrow in equal measure. Her hair, still thick though completely white, was arranged in 2 braids wrapped with ermine fur. She wore a deerskin dress adorned with intricate quill work and carried what appeared to be a medicine pouch decorated with bear claws, but it was her eyes that commanded attention, dark, penetrating and displaying an intelligence so acute, Rebecca felt momentarily transparent, as if her every thought and motivation lay exposed to this woman's gaze. Swiftbear stepped forward, bowing his head slightly in respect, before speaking. In Crow, the exchange was brief but seemed to carry significant weight. Grey Willow listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. When Swiftbear finished, she studied the sisters for a long, uncomfortable moment before finally addressing them directly. "So," she said in perfect, barely accented English. "You are the women my grandson found hiding in Buffalo." Her direct reference to their desperate strategy momentarily startled Rebecca until she realized Swift Bear must have included this detail in his report. "Yes," Rebecca answered, meeting the elder's gaze steadily. "Your grandson saved our lives. We're deeply grateful for his help." Grey Willow's expression remained inscrutable. Many white women would have died rather than shelter an animal carcass. Pride stronger than survival instinct. She tilted her head slightly. "You chose life, despite ugliness and discomfort. Interesting choice." The assessment carried neither approval nor condemnation, merely observation. Rebecca sensed this was some form of test, their response potentially influencing their reception. "We had responsibility," Sarah said unexpectedly, gesturing toward Emma. "Not just for ourselves, but for her." Grey Willow's attention shifted to the child, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Yes, the little one whose parents died in the attack." She moved closer, kneeling despite her age to meet Emma at eye level. "You have traveled a hard road, young one." Emma, who had remained largely silent around strangers, surprised them all by responding directly. "Swift Bear helped us. He made me a rabbit toy." She pulled the small bone figure from her pocket as evidence. Grey Willow examined the toy with appropriate seriousness before returning it. "My grandson has clever hands, always did, even as boy." Rising again, she addressed the gathered crowd in Crow, her voice carrying authority that required no translation. The onlookers dispersed, though reluctantly, until only Swift Bear remained with them. "Come," Grey Willow instructed, holding open her lodge flap. "Winter air not good for talking. Inside we will speak of what comes next." The interior of Grey Willow's lodge revealed much about its occupant. Unlike the cluttered medicine shops of white doctors Rebecca had seen, with their jumbled bottles and instruments, Grey Willow's healing space displayed meticulous organization. Dried plants hung in careful bundles from lodge poles, each apparently with specific purpose. Pouches and containers of various materials were arranged by size and function. A central fire burned cleanly, with minimal smoke escaping through the perfect draft of the smoke hole above. The medicine woman gestured for them to sit on woven mats near the fire while she prepared a tea from roots and herbs. The ritual seemed both practical and ceremonial, hospitality offered while she formulated her thoughts about these unexpected visitors. "Swift Bear tells me white outlaws specifically hunt you," she said finally, passing cups of steaming liquid to each of them. "Not random violence, but targeted pursuit. Why?" Rebecca exchanged glances with Sarah, silently determining how much to reveal. Grey Willow noticed the hesitation and smiled for the first time, a surprisingly warm expression that transformed her austere features. "Truth serves you better than comfortable stories," she advised. "I have lived long enough to recognize difference." The gentle admonishment decided Rebecca. She described their situation fully. Dixon's infiltration of the wagon train, his apparent interest in valuables the sisters might possess, the targeted nature of the massacre, and the outlaws' continued pursuit despite the passage of time and difficult conditions. Grey Willow listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as if confirming private theories. When Rebecca finished, the elder sipped her tea thoughtfully before responding. "This man, Dixon, believes you carry something valuable. Do you?" "Not that we know of," Sarah answered, bewilderment clear in her voice. "We brought only essentials. For frontier living, clothing, basic tools, a few books, and personal mementos from our father." Grey Willow's sharp gaze studied them both. "Sometimes value lies in what we carry without knowing. Pioneer women often transport precious things, sewn into clothing hidden in ordinary objects." The suggestion prompted Rebecca to reconsider their father's final days and his preparations for their journey west. Had he secreted something of value among their possessions, without telling them, perhaps for their own protection. It seemed unlikely. Professor Thompson had always been transparent with his daughters, treating them as intellectual equals rather than fragile beings requiring protection from knowledge. "There is something else to consider," Grey Willow continued. "Value not always in gold or jewels, sometimes in information." She glanced at Swift Bear, who nodded confirmation of her thinking. This Dixon, what was his interest before attack? Rebecca frowned, recalling details that had seemed insignificant at the time. "He asked many questions about our father's work, his papers and books, Sarah's sketches too. He seemed particularly interested in her maps and landscape drawings." "Your father's profession?" Grey Willow inquired. "He was a professor of natural sciences at Harvard University," Sarah explained, specializing in geology and cartography. Grey Willow and Swift Bear exchanged significant glances. "Mapmaker," the elder said simply, "in territory where few accurate maps exist." The implication crystallized in Rebecca's mind with sudden clarity. Their father's detailed notebooks on Western geological formations, works he had compiled from explorer accounts and scientific expeditions over decades. His speculations about mineral deposits, water sources, and natural routes through difficult terrain. Sarah's precise sketches documenting landscapes along their journey west, with her inherited talent for capturing topographical details that others might miss. "They think we have maps," Rebecca breathed, understanding dawning. "Maps that might lead to gold deposits or other valuable resources." Grey Willow nodded. "White man's hunger for yellow metal causes much suffering. Men kill for possibility alone, even without certainty." The explanation made terrible sense of Dixon's otherwise inexplicable actions. The betrayal, the massacre, the continued pursuit, all driven by greed and the belief that the Thompson sisters carried information that could lead to untold wealth. "What should we do?" Sarah asked, the enormity of their situation settling over her. "They won't stop looking. First rest and heal," Grey Willow said practically. "Safety found in my camp for now. Winter makes pursuit difficult even for determined men." She stirred the fire thoughtfully. "When snow melts, different decisions needed." With that pragmatic assessment, Grey Willow shifted to immediate concerns. She dispatched Swift Bear to arrange proper accommodations, a small lodge near her own where the sisters and Emma could establish themselves without disrupting camp routines. Food would be provided, and in exchange they would contribute to daily tasks once rested. "Your knowledge has value to my people," Grey Willow explained. "Reading, writing, different medicines, different ways of making things. Fair exchange until permanent solution found." The arrangement seemed eminently reasonable. Neither charity that might breed resentment nor exploitation of their vulnerable position. Rebecca found herself increasingly impressed by the elder's balanced wisdom, so different from the impractical idealism or ruthless pragmatism that seemed to characterize much of white society's approaches. As Swift Bear prepared to lead them to their assigned lodge, Grey Willow made a final observation. "You come to us through strange path, hidden in dead buffalo, guided by survivor of different world." Her weathered face held something approaching amusement. "Old stories say those who arrive by unusual roads bring change with them. We shall see what changes you three bring to Absaroka." With these enigmatic words, they were dismissed into Swift Bear's care. As they crossed the central area of the camp toward their new temporary home, Rebecca noticed the crow watching them with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. Their integration would not be seamless or immediate. Trust would need to be earned through demonstrated goodwill and contribution. Yet for the first time since the massacre, Rebecca felt something beyond mere survival was possible. Here, in this unlikely sanctuary, among people who had every historical reason to reject them, they had found not just physical safety, but the beginnings of a path forward. Emma, walking between the sisters, suddenly reached out to take both their hands. The simple gesture, claiming them as her new family, amid the wreckage of all they had known, moved Rebecca deeply. Together, they had survived the unthinkable. Together, they would face whatever came next. The buffalo carcass that had sheltered them in desperate hours now seemed a fitting symbol of their journey, a passage through death into unforeseen life, emerging transformed on the other side. As they entered the lodge that would become their home for the winter months ahead, Rebecca silently thanked whatever providence had guided Swiftbear to find 3 desperate souls hiding in the most unlikely of refuges. Their journey wasn't over. Indeed, with Dixon and his men still hunting them, new challenges inevitably awaited when spring thawed the mountain passes. But they had found breathing space, time to heal and prepare for the decisions that would shape their future in this harsh but magnificent country. As Grey Willow had observed, they had arrived by an unusual road. What changes they might bring, to themselves, to the Crow, to the frontier itself, remained to be written in the continuing story of their remarkable survival. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.